Welcome to another episode of Teacher Talks with Michael Klotz, a series of conversations with some of my favorite string players about their beloved teachers. Today I am joined by violinist and violist Ani Kavafian in a conversation about her teacher, Oscar Shumsky.
Hi, Michael. Nice to see you.
Oh, you too. So great to have you here as part of Teacher Talks. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule with teaching,
My pleasure.
and puppy raising.
My many lives coming crashing together.
Wow.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm glad to be with you. Well, I wish we could play together again. That would be fun. Well, but maybe someday.
Right?
We're getting closer anyway.
I feel like we're getting closer. Yeah, I feel like we're getting there. So I've been looking forward to this one for quite a while. I've talked to you before and about how much I just admire and revere Oscar Shumsky, and just really awesome to have you here as one of his, principal disciples. And I wonder, could we just start with, could you tell us how you came to meet Mr. Shumsky? I know that there's a little bit of a story.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite stories. Back when I was a student at Juilliard, before that, my sister had started her schooling at Juilliard 4 years before I did, or 3 years. And at the time, I just thought the right thing to do was to go to Juilliard to study with Ivan Galamian, who's such a famous, revered teacher. So that's what I did as well. It was not a happy marriage for me. I felt a little bit constrained by the restrictive way that he taught, especially the students that were younger or that had just begun with him. I think he gave a little more leeway to the students when they got older or if they were with him for a while. But so, in those days, we had to get the fingerings and the bowings from whomever studied the piece before. And, a lot of times I'd get fingerings and bowings from Daniel Phillips, who's been my friend since, young teen years at Meadowmount. Anyway, I got the fingerings and I had studied with him for almost 2 years, and I got the fingerings and bowings for the Tchaikovsky concerto. And I was practicing and I got to the first A major arpeggio in the cadenza, and I thought, why should I go da 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 da, well, shifting every 3 notes? I'm just going to go to the E string and then just make one shift up, and it'll be more brilliant. I'll get to the bright string earlier, and I'll have less shifting. It's going to be much better. I knew he may not like it, so I practiced it hard. So I went to my lesson. I got to that point, and it went very well. But I heard, and he stopped me and he said, "That's the wrong fingering." And to this day, I think if he had said, "I want you to do another fingering," or "That's not the fingering I gave you," but he said, "That's the wrong fingering," and something went off in my head, and I said, "This is not going to work for me." So at the time, my colleagues, my classmates were working with Shumsky, and he put together some orchestras in New Jersey where a lot of the Juilliard students played in those orchestras. And so I did as well, and so did my sister. And I had, worked with him, and I was just blown away by his musicianship and his playing. And so with great trepidation, I called him and I asked him if he would please take me as a student. And it was, it wasn't like, "Oh, I'd love to teach you." He said, "Well, I don't like to have that many students, and I do have, but I think I can make room for you." And so anyway, so long story short, I called Mr. Galamian, because in those days it was kind of hard to talk to him in person. it was easier on the phone. He could hear better on the phone. So I called him and I explained to him that I wanted to move on to another teacher. And at the time, he had just had the split up with Dorothy DeLay. So we're talking a long time ago, this is early 70s. And so he said, "You're not going to her, are you?" And I said, "No, Mr. Galamian, I'm not going to Miss DeLay. I'm going to Mr. Shumsky." And he said, "He's a good man." Oh. So, and then to finish this story, which I'm sorry, it's sort of a really long story.
Must have been a weight off your shoulders to have.
Oh, yeah. So I go to my first lesson with Shumsky, and he says, at the end of the lesson, he says, "Okay, next week I'd like you to bring the Rondo Capriccioso of Saint-Saëns." And I said, "Oh, great." I said, "Who has the fingerings and the bowings?" And he looked at me like, "Wow, what planet are you from? What's the matter with you?" I mean, he was kind. He wasn't ridiculing by any means, but he was like kind of puzzled that I would ask such a stupid question. So he said, "Well, you go home and figure it out, and I'll help you next week if you have trouble." Well, I went home and I didn't know what I was doing because I was always spoon-fed all these things.
Right. Wow.
But it's a good place to insert that. Of course, I teach the same way. I don't like to give my parts to my students unless it's a really, there's a short time or they're very young. I always want my students to figure out their fingerings and bowings, because I think the best teachers are the ones that teach the students to teach themselves. Cool. I'm sure you feel the same way.
But I agree with you with the younger students. I think that it's
so that it does save time, and I do get some younger students at Curtis, so that with them I do share the parts, and that does help a lot.
So then, when you went to Mr. Shumsky, talk about how are the lessons different than Galamian? I mean, could you tell?
Well, first of all, Galamian never really demonstrated, and Shumsky demonstrated all the time, and which was sort of it was our downfall in a way, because you'd hear this sound coming out and this playing, and you would just some of us would just crumble because we were just so overwhelmed and so intimidated, and then others would try to imitate him, which of course was a big mistake. But little by little I got used to how to not be overwhelmed and how to be myself. And he had such a different approach because it was all about the score and about the composer and the integrity of the phrasing and the music. And of course it was about the violin too, but the reason to have the technique to play these pieces was so that you could make the music speak. So that was different. And he talked a lot about music, and I'd play maybe a Bach sonata or something, and he'd say, "This is just like the English suite in blah 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 major," and then he'd go to the piano and start playing the English suite or whatever, and then he would accompany. Of course, he was a very skilled pianist, and he would accompany me or collaborate on sonatas and so forth. And whether he was playing the piano or the violin, I mean, he played the entire score of the concerto on the violin or on the piano. So it was inspiring. It was really inspiring, because once you got over the intimidation factor, you could be just inspired all the time.
When I was at Juilliard, we had a Shumsky club. And and I had made friends with Eric. In fact, I'll just take a moment and tell you that my story with Mr. Shumsky. I'll leave out some details because they're not really that appropriate for Zoom. But I chanced to meet.
We'll get those details later.
We'll talk later. But I chanced to meet Leonid Hambro.
Oh, wonderful!
Yeah, it was at a friend's apartment. It was before I started Juilliard, so like the spring before I was coming there for my master's, and the circumstances notwithstanding, Hambro was in this apartment, And I didn't know who he was. I just saw an older guy sitting there, and we start talking. And Leonid Hambro, and I was, wow, okay. And he told us some great stories. And I said, I want to know about Mr. Shumsky. Can you tell me about Shumsky? He goes, you got one of those damn mobile telephones? I said, sure. So he calls his wife and he says, get me Oscar's number.
Oh my gosh.
And this is, I'm talking about like April or May of 2000. Okay.
Okay.
It calls him up and he goes,
that was the year he passed away, wasn't it?
Well, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'm ruining your story. Go ahead.
No. and anyway, he puts Shumsky on the phone with me.
Wow.
I was like, I just, and he was so friendly and so kind. And I, of course, I told him how much his playing meant to me. And my teacher, Zvi Zeitlin, just always spoke with the utmost reverence about him.
Yeah.
He didn't speak that way about many, but about Shumsky he did.
Yeah.
And I just, you know, and he had said, well, when you come in the fall, come out to my house, and if you want to play for me. And he was just so friendly that my colleague, whom you know, Jason Calloway from my quartet, was with me, and he got on the phone and he said, well, why don't bring your cello and maybe we'll read a string trio or something.
Oh, wow.
We were just beside ourselves. And then, yeah, that summer he passed away.
Oh,
and
so
I was
sad.
like really heartbroken, you know.
I can imagine you a missed opportunity.
But as a result, I connected with Eric and we became friends. But what I was going to ask you, I mean, the playing, we had a Shumsky club, and we would listen incessantly to, you know, the Izai, the Brahms Hungarian dances. I mean, anything we could get our hands on, you know. And what was it like to be in a room and just hear that sensuous sound? I mean, that tone, that it's just like not many people have that tone.
Yeah, the sound was just, it was like something that was sizzling, you know, and it was so alive and yet so luscious and so generous and so filled with this the sonority, you know. I mean, it just sort of enveloped the entire room and you as a person. But I have to tell you that, you know, he occasionally would teach us in his home in Rye. Mm-hmm. So I went for lessons there a few times, and the difference between what he was like in New York, in that kind of, you know, that atmosphere at Juilliard, and in New York, it was not the most conducive for him, you know, mentally. The way he played was unbelievable at Juilliard, but the way he played in Rye was just out of this world, just incredible. He had a big picture window in the living room, and he would walk over to the window and he would be playing, and he would be so relaxed. He'd say, look at the beautiful trees and nature. Isn't nature amazing? And blah, blah, blah. And he'd play, and I'd be like, oh my God, this is, I just wish I could have bottled that up and had it today. One time I walked into the house, and I walked into the kitchen, and the Rode Strad was sitting on the kitchen counter next to the sink with clamps on it. I'll never forget that. I was like, oh my God. You know, that's probably common now, but in those days, you know, that he would do his own gluing on this gorgeous violin was pretty intense.
Well, he had wide-ranging interests, right? I mean, he was a woodworker, he was a photographer. Could you talk a little bit about that? Photographer. Yeah. And I always, it's interesting that you mentioned that he was different being in the studio at Juilliard and home. You know, we all often, some of us who listen to him wonder, you know, it seemed like he should have had the kind of career like, you know, Isaac Stern or someone like that. Is it just that he didn't really want that kind of a career? How did that?
I think it was more than that. I think he did. First of all, he wouldn't play the games. He certainly was not going to promote himself or push himself in any way. That, you know, that would seem very out of character for him. But I also think that his kind of playing appealed to maybe not the general audience as much. And also there was something sometimes that it was still unbelievable playing, but there was something a little bit restricted when he played in public. And I wouldn't say he had a nerve issue, but he was not as relaxed as he was. Like you can see from the story of the difference of him playing in New York City or in Rye, that it was important for him to be relaxed and really to put his best foot forward. So, I think he lost a little something in performance for the general public. The connoisseurs were still just blown away by the incredible playing, but I think the general public was looking for something more showy, somebody that moved around a lot and didn't just stand up there and play. He just stood up there and played.
It's very interesting.
And so what came out was unbelievable, but it was not a big show.
Okay, it's interesting because I had heard that from some people that he was a little bit closed up, restrictive, as you say, in public, but that technically everything was still obviously intact.
Incredible.
Yeah.
On viola, as you know, of course, because there was it Tully Hall? I think it was at Tully. He did a solo violin and viola recital. So there was no piano at all, and he switched back and forth between the violin and the viola, and he was, of course, an incredible violist. Well, I would give anything to have a recording. He and I played the Handel Halverson in a pre-concert recital at mostly Mozart. I mean, I think I was still a student. And I would give anything. I probably sounded like what, but I'd give anything to have a recording of that. I remember the sound of his open strings on the last note. It was like a whole orchestra. It was just unbelievable, the sonority.
But never forced, right? I mean, he never forced the sound.
No, he always had a technique of coaxing the sound out, pulling the sound out. He had a very flexible grip that would, at the frog he would drag more than press. He would pull the sound out, and he just had a way of being able to make the strings vibrate at their fullest. It
probably would have sounded that way on any violin, right? I mean, not necessarily the Rhodes Strat.
I don't know what viola did he play? I should have asked Eric. I don't know what viola he had what he usually used.
Eric may have told me once, but Larry Dutton once sent me a recording of that Jubilate Domino. I don't know if you heard that.
Yes.
I played it for all my students. Like, I made them all listen to it and said, this is what you need to sound like.
Yes.
What you're playing.
Like going to school, listening to that. Yeah.
In lessons, I know for my team, I mean, you knew Tzvi, and he was very, very fond of you.
I loved him. He was such a great man and a great musician.
He was. In lessons, he wasn't easy, but I'm grateful for it. Was he strict? I mean, was he strict?
Well, he didn't. He never raised his voice, but he could put you in your place, not with a mean streak or anything, but I remember taking the 10th Beethoven Sonata to him for a lesson, and he's right. I had no business playing that music at that age in that way, and I practiced it and it was ready, but I had no idea what I was doing musically, and so he could make you feel pretty like you had a lot of work to do. He never, he didn't use a shoulder rest, and I used a shoulder rest when I was studying with Galamian, and at the beginning of my studies with Shumsky, I knew that Shumsky didn't like the shoulder rest. He didn't ask me to get rid of it, but I just wanted to get rid of it because everything he did meant so much to me that I thought I had to try it. So I took a whole summer and totally redid my technique. I practiced scales and etudes and arpeggios and all that for 2 months. And I added some Bach the third month, but I learned to support my fiddle with my hand rather than my neck and my shoulder. It was just so different. It did take the whole summer, but I was grateful I did that work because I think technically I draw on that all the time. I don't have a lot of time to practice, so it's good to have a foundation like that. And then I did get rid of my shoulder rest after that. And then I had some lessons with Milstein. Milstein was like a artist in residence at Juilliard 1 year that I was there.
Oh, that's cool.
And so I played for him. He was so inspiring, but also with the same philosophy of, the violin should be free. The shoulder rest just makes it just sit there like a table, and he would show us, he would play up here or over here or on his stomach, or, he had this gorgeous silk scarf that would drape over his violin, and he would demonstrate. And so between Shumsky and Milstein, I was like, I got to get rid of the shoulder rest.
Yeah.
And I don't have a big thick neck, so
that's why I don't play with one.
No, good for you.
Yeah, Zvi took it when I was 17. I had a lesson with Zvi, and
good for him.
At his home in Rochester. It was so cold, a Rochester December, and I was playing the G minor Bach fugue, and not very well at the time. But he came over and he took the shoulder pad off and he threw it in his fireplace.
Oh my gosh!
And he said, "Give that." He said, "Give that to your enemies." And from then on, I just didn't use a shoulder pad. So,
wow.
But yeah, I do think that having a short neck is helpful. But then you have someone like Arnold Steinhardt, who has a really long neck, who didn't want to use a shoulder pad, so he got the higher chin rest, right?
Exactly. But you see, that's the difference. Like, here, I don't have my fiddle out, but okay, so let's say you're playing with let's say I have a long neck and my chin rest has to be up here. If you don't have a high chin rest and you just have a shoulder rest, this is natural, right? But if you're up here, now you're doing this,
Right.
So I think the ones with the long necks should do what Arnold did, which is to build up you can take longer feet for your chin rest. You can use like a viola chin rest or the feet from a viola chin rest, and then add cork to the top, and then then you're not playing. It's like playing like this, or like trying to play up here. I'm exaggerating a little bit. You know what I mean? It for those of us anyway. I don't push my students to get rid of their shoulder rest, but they know how I feel about it.
But I mean, of course, in all fairness, there are wonderful players that use them, and
totally.
But,
you're absolutely right.
Yeah. I wonder, you had mentioned, Miss DeLay, and of course, many of us know that she was very much helpful to her students career-wise, and in fact, made quite a established a reputation in a good way, for that.
Yeah.
Did Shumsky do things like that, or did he talk to you? Did he sort of guide his students? Did he want you to become?
No, I would have to say no. I mean, he did not believe in competitions. So he was definitely not I did one or two, I think, while I was studying with him. He didn't stop me, but he didn't believe in them. And he said he would never serve on a jury again, because he served on a jury where he just felt like the right thing didn't happen. And so it's that thing where if people with integrity don't serve on juries because they're so, bad things happen, then the people that don't have integrity are the ones that, you know what I mean? It's a double-edged sword. I think it's just to try to make things fair,
Of course.
But no, he was not a promoter, and he didn't. He gave me performance opportunities. With I played the Spohr Concerto with his Colonial Symphony out there in New Jersey.
Oh.
That was pretty cool, with him conducting the Spohr 8th Concerto. I love that piece so much.
That's a great piece.
Yes. So I did stuff like that, and then we did that. I guess mostly Mozart at that the concert where I did the Handel Halverson with him. I think we played Bach double in the regular concert. He was conducting the orchestra, and then I played with him.
So was he like officially the conductor of the Mostly Mozart Orchestra, or was he like a guest conductor?
No, I think he was just a guest conductor at that time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And who were some of your classmates? I mean, of course.
Oh God, we had such a great class. Well, first of all, from the Emerson Quartet, Phil Setzer and Gene Drucker. Those were good friends and studio mates. Guillermo Figueroa, whom you know very well. I knew Guillermo from Interlochen days, so we've been friends since we were like 14, 15 years old. But then again at Juilliard, and Ida Bieler, who's a wonderful violinist and lived in Europe, played in Europe mostly, but she teaches at the North Carolina School of the Arts, so I think she's back in the States now. A wonderful German violinist named Gertz Rufstig, really great player. Before my time was Kathy Lenski. You know Kathy Lenski from LA?
Yes.
I remember Shumsky loved her, and he used to say to me, he would say, I think you can be a soloist. And I also said that to Kathy Lenski, so he was very fond of her and her playing. She's a great player. Mm-hmm. She is a great player. Mm-hmm. So there's Kathy, and trying to think of who else. Those are the main studio mates.
And did you stay in touch with Mr. Shumsky? Did you stay close after you graduated?
I used to write him letters, and he used to reply. I do have a few letters of his that I've kept. Yes, I stayed in touch, and I kept him apprised of what I was doing. I remember when I joined the Beaux Arts Trio, I told him about that, and then I would send him recordings, and he would always reply. And of course, it was all snail mail at the time, but I treasure those letters with that very careful writing. And then the other things that I treasure are my parts, the music that I have that he marked in, and sometimes he would mark with a red pencil to emphasize something. And so those are treasures. And then I have some things where he made some suggestions of repertoire that he would carefully write out, and I kept everything. There wasn't that much, but I did keep everything. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Let me close the window. It's I'm probably making noise right now.
Oh, okay. And so it's known amongst people who are fans of Mr. Shumsky that he kind of had a resurgence like later in his career, like I think maybe in his 70s or 60s or something like that. Even later, I think even later he started having a great career, especially in the UK. Mm-hmm. But who had a lot to do with that was Eric Wen. Do you know Eric? Yes.
Eric is the biggest Shumsky fan of all.
Yeah.
And a total authority on every note that he played. There's a Brahms concerto. There was this is going to be amazing when it comes out. He did do a recording of the Brahms concerto. I'm not sure exactly how old he was. I think late 60s or something. And the recording was never released. It was not a great collaboration. The conductor was not very cooperative. Every time they stopped, the concertmaster would start playing the same passage that Shumsky was playing. You know how people can be. It's just right. So stupid. And then they didn't think they had the taste to put it together, but Eric Wen did.
Oh, he did.
So he got a hold of the recording and put it together, and I heard it a little while ago is just stupendous.
Oh,
It's just fantastic playing. And having studied that piece with him, it was so great to hear it.
wow. Well, there's a video
you can look
on,
forward to that.
oh, I can't wait. Yeah, there's a video on YouTube of him playing the Brahms. I think even maybe it's,
Yes, that's quite late in his life.
yeah, it's gorgeous, and it's really,
Yeah,
it's really something. Wow. Well,
you know, he had a bowing for the beginning of Brahms that was, you know, that I share now with my students, that is so fantastic. Well, I don't have, you know, I don't want to waste your time with it, but instead of doing, you know, with the retake of the down bow, he would have us go up bow, dum, bum, 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 and to do two downs that cross the strings, da 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 dee da 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 dee.
awesome.
And it's a great bowing because it's very free, you know.
Wow.
I teach that a lot.
That, yeah, that was my next question. I mean, do you the concertos and the works that you studied with him, do you use a lot of his bowings or a lot of the suggestions that you took?
I do, and it makes me feel like I wish I had studied every concerto with him. Some of the things I don't, but many of the things I do. And I think I'm maybe a little bit stricter with keeping slurs than I used to be. But a lot of the great violin fingerings and bowings came from Shumsky.
Wow. Yeah. It's like one wishes that there were, you know, because there's editions of the major concertos with, and many of them edited by Francis Scotti and Gingold, and, you know, people who knew something, of course.
Yeah.
But you know, I wish that there was more of like Shumsky, because, you know, when just listening to him play everything, you know,
yes, I agree, totally agree.
And this
probably between all of us, you know, between Guillermo and Jean and Phil and myself, maybe we could put together some editions. You know, it never occurred to me, but I think that'd be very cool.
Hey, that's a great idea. That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Ida, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. We're starting to have a little bit of internet issues, so I think it's a good time to wrap it up. But I really appreciate your time. And
my pleasure, Mike. It's great to visit with you again, and of course to talk about my favorite subject.
Thank you so much, Ida.